Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And I figured since last week I went over what my actual EDC is today, it might be fun to take a look back and kind of show how I got here. Because there have been a couple of developments along the way that obviously have informed some of my choices and have given me some of the opinions that I currently hold. So let's jump into it. When I turned 21, I bought my first handgun. I was still in college at that time. And of course, being a child of the 90s, Brosnan was my James Bond. And as such, the Walther P99 really held some appeal to me. And it was recommended that I look at Glocks, but I had up to that point shot a full-size Glock 22, the full-size 40 cal, and especially back before I really knew how to shoot, I hated that thing, and it turned me off to Glocks entirely. So Glocks were completely off the table. Walther was obviously a reputable company, and the P99 was offered in its anti-stress configuration, which is double action, single action. So that, as someone who was brand new to the prospect of carrying a handgun, the idea of a long double action first trigger press was comforting to me. And so I put the gun on layaway, and a few months later managed to actually bring it home, so to speak. And I carried that in a fist holsters close crop combination. That model holster is so old that I actually have not been able to find pictures of it on the internet. Essentially, it was a leather pancake holster that also came with IWB loops, so it could be worn either outside the waistband or inside the waistband, hence the name. It was a perfectly serviceable holster. It wasn't anything janky. It was decent quality leather. The mouth was reinforced. And so mercifully, my foray into concealed carry was with some decent equipment. I was still running 3-dot sights and all of that. So after a while, when I moved to Texas, the folks where I was working at the gun shop were giving me a little bit of shit over my choice of carry gun. Not for any real good reason. There was an unfortunate sort of naming convention that Walther used to use in their pistols, where it was a 3-letter prefix followed by the serial number. I'm not going to go into it because, quite frankly, what the 3-letter prefix was will actually violate pretty much every platform's terms of service because it was a pejorative slur. But that was not the reason that I decided to get rid of the pistol. I actually traded it for a SIG 228. Again, sticking with the double action configuration, I went from the Walther to the SIG because the SIG at that time, the 228 specifically, had a little bit more impressive pedigree in my mind. It was used by NCIS and Army CID. I believe it was used in elements of naval special warfare as well. So, the fact of all of that, the rebounding hammer piece of it was another sort of comforting element to my, still relatively ignorant self at that point. And that is when I made arguably the cringiest choice in terms of carry, which I honestly is not that regrettable. But I switched from a full leather holster to the Comptac MTAC, which is a hybrid. Of the hybrid holsters out there, it's what my 5th grade English teacher would call a good wrong answer. The double stitched leather, the way the faceplate is actually attached to the leather backer, is, I guess, the best way that you can kind of do that specific configuration. And it was comfortable to carry. And, that was, again, back when I was working at a gun shop. So the idea of printing was not really a huge priority for me. From recollections, it concealed reasonably fine. Because that's also before I really knew how to dress. So I was wearing a whole bunch of baggy, oversized shirts and things like that. Really, the only gripe that I had was the belt clips on the Comptac. They were okay. They were a little flimsy for my taste, but I really didn't take any training up to that point either, so I didn't experience any failures with it, but really just because I didn't run it hard enough. All of that seemed like it was a decent idea until I actually started carrying the thing in Texas summers. And let me tell you, the old school West German finishing is not designed to be sweat on for, 10 hours a day. And I relegated that SIG to the gun safe mostly because it just turned into a maintenance headache. I was having to touch it up every 3 to 5 days just to keep things from rusting. And I'm lazy, so that wasn't fun for me. So I was looking for a more low maintenance option. And that's when Glock comes back into the picture. I broke down. At that point, I had taken my first pistol class, which was a tactical response fighting pistol with James Yeager. And any of you that are familiar with him know his affinity for the Glock 19. And so I was like, well, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, so screw it. I got myself a Glock 19, just a bone stock Gen 3, and continued to carry it in a Comptac MTAC for a while. Then I started to play around with appendix carry. I had found some of Paul Gomez's videos, and I think this was around 2011, 2012-ish. Honestly, my first foray was I quite literally just took the MTech and ran it in appendix, which wasn't the best idea because it was this big-ass panel of leather. It worked okay, and it at least sort of showed me the viability of the carry position, but it certainly wasn't a good option. I briefly tried one of the sidecar style holsters. I hated it, and it cracked almost not immediately, but it cracked in short order. This was one where the mag carrier and the holster body were molded out of the same piece of Kydex. It didn't have a hinge on it, but honestly, I'm not a fan of the sidecar configurations at large. There's been plenty of videos out there as to why they're not optimal, but it's besides the point. So toyed around with appendix carry, but I was still struggling to get good concealment out of it. And so I thought, well, maybe I just need a smaller gun. And so a friend of mine in the space had a Glock 26 that he was looking to get rid of. It had actually been worked over by ATEI. So I picked that up and carried that for a little bit. And I had also won one of the Raven Vanguard 2s in a promotional giveaway. This was back right when they launched those. So the Glock 26 in the Vanguard 2 was my attempt to get better concealment. Good idea in theory, but this was also well before I really understood concealment mechanics. And it actually printed worse and was less comfortable. So obviously that was a bit frustrating because that was like $800 out the window once you factor everything in. And so I went back to the 19, and it was around that point where I took the Spencer Keepers class. It was the appendix carry skills and handgun essentials. And I got to run one of his holsters. He had a loaner that he let me use over the course of the class, and that was kind of the light bulb moment for me. The longer holster body, everything was nicely rounded. That was kind of my aha moment of, oh, this is how this is supposed to work. And so, as such, the Keeper became my kind of go-to default for a while. It was actually a 17 length holster. And then when they debuted the Cornerstone, they were gracious enough to send me one of those as well. And I liked it. It's a good, viable option for a tuckable holster. The only reason that I don't really run it anymore is because it's not Enigma compatible, unfortunately. It has the wing molded into the holster body. But still, a good option. During the course of all of that, back when I was looking for good tuckable options, before I got my hands on the Cornerstone, Daniel Reedy over at Primer Peak was gracious enough to send me his Dark Star Apollo to just play around with. And that one was actually a 34 length, which was kind of another light bulb moment. And I realized how much better the concealment was that I was getting out of this longer holster body. And so the 34 length Orion was my default holster, and basically still is, because once the Enigma dropped a few years back at this point, um, I was just bolted one onto the other, and we were, off to the races. And that's kind of where we leave off. Is the Orion shell on the Enigma faceplate has become my standard, and then for my other pistols, I've got various different Darkstar holsters as well. Like I said, I got lucky. I didn't really make any supremely cringeworthy choices in my carry evolution. Mostly because I was either just pure dumb lucked my way into a good decision, or I had folks that were a whole lot smarter than me that I was fortunate enough to have access to, and smart enough to actually listen to. So I will say that over the course of all that, the interesting development was, even after going to striker guns, it turns out that I actually vastly prefer the profile of a double action trigger. And so, sticking with the Glock 19, I did so because, quite frankly, that's when I started really taking training seriously. And I was of that mindset. I was like, well, I haven't earned the right to upgrade my gun, and I need to be able to outshoot a bone stock gun before I start making modifications to it. That got in my way a little bit, but I think I'm going to save that for its own video, going over the modifications that I've made to my carry pistol and why, and what the catalysts were for that. So stay tuned for that one. I think I'll probably do that next week. And other than that, I want to hear down in the comments, what was your first carry pistol? What was your biggest carry mistake? And how far off are you now from where you started? Let me hear that. Other than that, I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.